Thank you for joining us for Volume 1 of the Manson Family, the final subject of Teet's limited docu-cast series, The Unholy Trinity of Cults. In 1967, Charles Manson, a troubled little man with a very big personality and very dangerous ideas, was released from prison, where he had already spent half his life, and began to amass a cult following of troubled youth in Los Angeles, which eventually and infamously became known as the murderous Manson Family. In this first volume, we explore the theory of Helter Skelter, which was the theory that eventually resulted in death sentences being handed down to Charlie and his most vicious acolytes for their involvement in the now world-famous Tate LaBianca murders in the Hollywood Hills. We cover everything from the Beatles to the Bible as we seek to understand the madness.
Welcome, everybody, to the Ever-Evolving Truth. It is Tuesday, and we are finishing up our series, The Unholy Trinity of Cults, with one of the most fascinating and one of the most well-known, famous, quote-unquote, cults of all time, the Manson Family. And I shouldn't say we, I should say Sterner and Leah have pages and pages of notes on this. Leah is obsessed with the Manson Family to the point where
I had a T-shirt with Leslie Van Houten's mugshot on it when I was in my 20s.
Oh my! How inappropriate! And also, I truly believe that if she lived in California, during that time, she totally would have been in the Manson Family, and she might have even carried out a murder.
I was going to say that. Like, Jeff knew me in my early 20s. I definitely would have been in the family.
Wait, so we had a squeaky. You could have been Icky.
I could have been
Icky. You're not Icky, of course, that's your word.
That would have been my nickname.
Yeah.
This story is Icky.
You'd be tricky Icky Leah.
Ooh,
that's
what
I would have called you. If I start a cult and you join it, that's your name.
Oh, I love it. That's my cult name. I love it.
I'm just going to be Old Man Caillou.
Yeah, Old Man Caillou. So as we teased on Friday's episode, this is actually going to be a two-parter. We're going to do the basically just the main story here today, and then we're going to do an alternate.
The Helter Skelter.
The way I see it going, so for many years, for decades, the prevailing idea about the Manson murders was this theory of a race war called Helter Skelter. This is what Manson preached to his followers. This is what they were all convicted of. This is why the murders took place, etc. This whole episode will describe the Manson story in the filter of Helter Skelter. Mm-hmm. Next week, for Volume 2 of Manson, the last in our Trinity of Cult subjects, we will discuss the alternate theories, everything from Helter Skelter not being the motive at all to
MK Ultra.
Some people saying that there's a CIA connection in MK Ultra. Tom O'Neill specifically saying that. So we're gonna go into all that next week. But for now, unless you guys had anything right here at the outset, I want to start with the biographies of the core members of the Manson family that are going to come into play here in the larger Helter Skelter story. That's going to be Seg 1. Seg 2, we're going to talk about Helter Skelter, the theory itself. There are, for any of you Beatles fans out there, you're going to be jonesing or you're going to be electrified by what I lay on you here, because Manson made some crazy connections, according to Paul Watkins, Tex Watson, and several others, including Bugliosi, the DA. It made so many connections between the White Album from the Beatles and the Manson family. He truly felt the Beatles were singing about him and sending messages to him, while also trying to subliminally tell the black man to rise up and start the race war. And then also his connections to the words in Revelation 9 and all that connected to his view of the world, Manson's view of the world, that he allegedly made believers of his followers, about this race war idea. And then in the third segment, we're going to talk about the trial itself. We're going to give you the bare bones version, but there's a lot of antics that took place in that trial. It's one of the craziest trials in the history of this country, and that'll be the third segment. And we're going to end with Charles Manson himself giving his thoughts on the validity of the Helter Skelter idea. So that's how we'll end things. So,
and in segment 4, we're going to examine my theory on how the Beatles should have been given the capital punishment for causing all of this chaos, and they're behind the murders.
With the White Album.
Some could say that John Lennon did suffer the death penalty, just in a completely
he was
different way.
not about peace and love, that man.
No, you know, an old tasteless joke my dad used to tell. He goes, "You know how the Beatles get back together? 3 bullets."
No,
I was like, "Oh, Dad, terrible."
Too soon.
That's worse than my Leslie Van Houten t-shirt.
Yeah, it probably is.
All right, so you guys take it away. I'm going to get out of the way, and I'll chime in if I have anything.
All right, so
Okay.
Leah, let's talk together. You and I both are very much into this. Let's talk. I mean, who better to start with than Charles Manson himself? So Charles Mills Manson. Also interchangeably used the surname Maddox, which was his mother's maiden name.
Mm-hmm.
He formed in 1967 what became known as the Manson Family, which was a commune, a hippie commune based in California. They lived at Spahn Ranch for a while, which was an old movie ranch owned by George Spahn. They lived in Death Valley for a time. They kind of moved
Topeka
around.
Canyon for a little while too.
Yeah. Was that
That was before
Dennis
Spahn?
Wilson? Okay, that was before Spahn.
That was before Spahn. Mm-hmm.
They lived with Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys for
the
quite a
summer
while.
of 1967. Yes, the summer of love basically is what they spent with Dennis Wilson.
Right. So basically that's what these followers known as the Manson family originally were, just sort of like these vagabond hippies, and Manson was trying to make connections in the music business to become a famous songwriter / rock and roll star, and his groupies were the Manson family.
Mm-hmm.
But those followers, within the course of 2 years, committed a series of 9 murders at 4 different locations
That they know of.
That we know of, right. The motives for the murder have been disputed by Manson, as we said at the outset. But the LA District Attorney, Vince Bugliosi, did prosecute on the basis that Manson intended to start a race war. And while Manson never directly ordered the murders, his ideology constituted conspiracy. Mm-hmm. And that is what made him legally liable for the same punishment as the rest of the actual people that committed the murders.
Yes.
Let's talk. Oh, go ahead, Leah. Sorry.
I was just going to say they were convicted and were given death sentences, and they overturned the death penalty in 1972. And now the remaining members that are still alive are in prison still for this.
And the only 3 people rather that are still alive are Tex Watson, Leslie Van Houten, and Patricia Krenwinkel.
And Bobby Beausoleil.
Bobby Beausoleil as well, yes. Mm-hmm. And then you have Susan Atkins, who has passed on, as well as Charles Manson, mm-hmm. who has passed on just recently in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
So to go back to the beginning for Manson here, he was born in November of 1934, to a 16-year-old mother named Kathleen Manson Bauer.
Kathleen Maddox originally.
Kathleen Manson Bauer Cavender Maddox was her maiden name, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Leah, talk a little bit about Kathleen.
So Kathleen Maddox grew up in Kentucky, and her mother was incredibly religious, and she wanted to rebel. She was one of those kids that was not going to sit in church and do what you're supposed to do, and she went out and she partied, and she met a 23-year-old man whose name was Colonel, and it was actually his first name, but he used to let people think that Colonel Walker Henderson Scott meant that Walker was his first name. So she thought she was with this military guy, and she gets pregnant, and it turns out that he was not in the military. He was just a, typical drunk 23-year-old man with a wife at home. And he never had any connection with Charlie. And when she was about 6 months pregnant, August of 34, Kathleen married William Manson, who was the first and only real father that Charlie Manson ever had. But she was a wild girl. She used to go out with her brother Luther, and she wound up in prison when Charlie was about 4 years old.
Right. And now Charlie, because his mother was in prison, had to go off and live with his aunt and uncle.
In McMecken. I love saying that.
Yeah, McMecken, West Virginia. And his uncle was a very harsh disciplinarian. One instance that sticks out at me, I'm sure you're going to know which one. The dress. Manson had come home and was had been mistreated in some way, some form or fashion, and he came home and he whined about it. And his uncle got so tired of the whining and the pleas of injustice that Manson was quote whining about.
He was being a sissy.
He was being a sissy. So he made this. How old was Manson at this time? A fifth grader?
He was in first grade at the time. First grade.
Okay, he made him go to first grade elementary school wearing a dress to teach him a lesson about being a sissy. So you can imagine some deep, dark psychological shit is taking hold in the brain of young Charles Manson. Skipping ahead a little bit, he did spend some time with his mother after she returned home from prison. Initially,
when he was in fourth grade.
That's right, and Manson said that was the happiest time of his life for a very brief period. But eventually, they moved to Indianapolis. His mother met a very bad alcoholic named Lewis through her AA meetings, believe it or not, and then married him. So Manson has spent a lot of time in and out of boys' homes. It is said that in his incarceration, I guess you could say, at the boys' home.
Well, he went to boys' home. His mother sent him away because he just wouldn't listen. The truant officers kept coming to his house. She could not control him. So she put him to a boys' home, which he ran away from. He ran away so many times that they eventually put him into juvenile hall.
That's right. And I believe it was in juvenile hall, correct me if I'm wrong, where he both experienced rape for the first time and also raped other boys.
Yes, absolutely.
At least one other boy.
And this is also where he discovered that the more crazy he acted, people didn't want to be around him. So he would sit and talk to himself and he would move his hands around, which eventually became part of his indoctrination of his followers. But that's where it came from. It was a protective mechanism for him.
He even said to his followers much later on when the trial was going down, right before they were arrested and the trial happened, he said, if they ever come down one more time and take me away, you guys are going to have to go along with this idea that I'm just old crazy Uncle Charlie that you're taking care of here. So that idea of confusing people with perceived craziness was something that went back a long way. So he eventually, Manson, sadly enough, it is sad for any human, he spent over 2/3 of his life in prison. By the time he was in his late 40s, he had spent over 30 years in prison.
He was 32 years old when he got out in 1967, and he had spent more than half of his life in prison.
At that time, yes. And then he only was out 2 years, or I guess technically 3 years, and he never got out when they were convicted in 71. Or 70, yeah.
71 was the conviction, I believe, right? Or was it 70?
It's 70 or 71. I'd have to look back at my notes specifically, but he spent the rest of his life in prison after that time. So he spent most of his life in prison. But in 1955, he married a waitress named Rosalie Jean Willis. He got her pregnant to his only documented son, I believe, Charles Manson Jr. During that time, who he has had little to no contact with for all of Charles Manson Jr.'s life. So he spent. Eventually, he got put away for the long one. He did 10 years in prison for violating probation on a check cashing charge.
Yes.
He'd initially gone there for a stolen car, and eventually, because of his continual violations, he was sent away for the big tour, the 10-year, and he remained there until 1967.
One thing he learned in prison that is incredibly important, I don't know if you're going to get to this, but was pimping. He discovered how to pimp women out and how to control women. And he said that his education was from criminals. That's all he knew. He spent from the time he was 10 until he was about 30 in prison.
He calls his fathers his prison fathers, that they
Yes.
were the ones that taught him everything he knew. He also is reportedly was a big studier of Dale Carnegie and
Mhm.
how to win friends and influence people. He stole liberally and directly from that book to influence the wills of others.
And Scientology.
Yes. In fact, when he was in prison and asked about it decades later, he put his religion of record as Scientology. So anyway, to move ahead a little bit for time constraints here, after he was discharged in 1967, he began attracting a group of followers, mostly young women from around California. Now, by this point, he's a con artist. He knows how to talk to these young girls. He would go right out. He went up to Squeaky Frome, Lynette Frome, who was sitting on a curb in California, and he said, "Your parents kicked you out, didn't they?"
And her father had just kicked her out.
Yes, and she, this impressionable and very crazy woman,
19-year-old girl,
decided that he was a psychic at that point. He knew what to say to who to hit them where they were most vulnerable and get an emotional, positive reaction for himself. So basically, the Manson family eventually developed into a doomsday cult when Manson became fixated on the idea of an imminent apocalyptic race war. You got to remember, 67, the Summer of Love and all that leads right up into the Civil Rights Movement, 68, the assassination of Martin Luther King, and riots in the streets. So if he was preaching this idea of a race war, think about the times that this was taking place in and how convincing that may have been.
It was very believable to these impressionable girls, and they were taking a lot of acid, but it was also very believable for anyone that this could happen at that point.
Manson believed that black people in America eventually would rise up and kill all whites except for Manson and his family, because they were going to be living in Death Valley in a bottomless pit, which was essentially a subterranean cave system that miners had told him about in that area that existed. The Manson family for months would go around on dune buggies looking for the bottomless pit. But that's allegedly where they were going to be when the black man took over and defeated the white man in a race war. And because the black man, according to Manson, could never govern themselves because they were too stupid.
They were too dumb.
It would require Manson to come out and rule as the new Christ figure over the new world, and the black men that had taken power would essentially be governed by Charlie and his family. This was the idea that they were going with. Now, obviously, everything that happened after being sentenced to death for the Tate LaBianca murders. Manson was convicted also for the death of musician Gary Hinman, also convicted of first-degree murder in the death of Shorty Shea, who was a ranch hand who Manson felt turned him in. And in 2014, the imprisoned old man, Charles Manson, was engaged to a 26-year-old girl named Afton Elaine Burton. And they never ended up getting married. But
she goes by the name Star now. That is the name he gave her.
That's right. He gave her the name Star. Now, Burton, it was reported by a journalist, Daniel Simone, that Burton only wanted to marry him so that she and friend Craig Hammond could use his corpse as a tourist attraction after his death. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But basically, once Manson started the Manson family, it was 2 years until they committed 9 atrocities, these murders, and he spent the rest of his life in prison. He still has a massive cultural appeal. He was the devil hippie. He was to some people the Antichrist. He was the evil Svengali that controlled the minds of young impressionable women and turned them into violent savages. That's the reputation that Manson has. But there's just a little bit of a brief biography before we get into some of the other members. Did you have anything else real quick on Manson, Leah?
No, not on this high level stuff. No. Eventually we will.
So let's talk about the core crew that he sent out. Out to murder in the night. We'll talk a little bit about Tex Watson, Charles Denton. Tex Watson, he was a member of the Manson family. He was born in 1945. He grew up as the old small-town American boy. He was involved in church. He taught Sunday school, honor student, school paper, captain of the football team. Star athlete, popular with the girls. He eventually, when he went to college for a brief period of time, he was a frat brother.
He was voted most likely to succeed in his yearbook.
Nothing about Charles Watson's early life could have ever led you to believe that he would become the sadistic savage that he did eventually become, because here's where things seem to have gone completely off the tracks for Tex. In January of 67, he began working at Braniff International as a baggage handler, and using the free airline tickets he had access to, he visited a frat brother in L.A., and it was there that he became addicted to this hippie lifestyle, the psychedelics, the music, Soon he hooked up with some women who were in the Manson family, met Charles Manson, and the rest is history for Tex.
Actually, Dennis Wilson picked him up while hitchhiking, and the other way around. I'm not sure. One of them picked the two different stories, but either Dennis picked up Tex or Tex picked up Dennis. They went back to Wilson's house, and Charlie was there. And that's
I thought that was Patricia Krenwinkel and another family member that Wilson picked up.
That's how Charlie met Dennis Wilson. Charles Manson met Wilson. Tex met him through hitchhiking also.
Earlier. Okay. Thanks for clearing that up. So after in 1969, Watson, after the murders, after all of the 9 murders had taken place, he fled Spawn Ranch, headed back to Texas, and it was there that he was eventually arrested for the Tate LaBianca murders and his involvement. He was the most involved out of anyone.
And he was tried separately.
He was tried separately because they fought extradition for almost a year. And then finally, when they dragged his ass back to California after the girls and Manson had been convicted, he stopped eating. He stopped talking. He lost 55 pounds and began acting as though he was in a catatonic state. But the jury still deemed him suitable to stand trial. He was sane, and he was sentenced to death, which was eventually commuted into life. So then we have... before I go to Susan, I want to go to Leslie. Because Leah, you were talking about Leslie Van Houten, the T-shirt you used to wear. Leslie Van Houten is one of the saddest stories here.
She is my favorite Manson. Favorite's not a good word, but she is the one that fascinates me the most. But go ahead.
Leslie grew up in an idyllic life. She was upper middle class. Everything was good. She was popular. She was beautiful. All these things. Homecoming queen. You're all American girl. But her family got divorced when she was 4. Her mother and father got divorced when she was 14. And at that point, as an act of rebellion, she began taking drugs, LSD, Benzedrine, pot. She ran away for a time, but did eventually come back. At 17, she became pregnant. She was forced by her traditional, let's say, mother to abort that baby illegally at a late term in the pregnancy.
And she tells the story of burying that baby in her backyard with her mother, and it is just gruesome. Yes,
and I think that event
was the moment
Van Houten over the edge. She felt very removed from her mother, harbored intense anger toward her, according to Van Houten. So she talks about she originally moved to Northern California. She hooked up with Catherine Scher and Bobby Beausoleil, 2 Manson family associates at least. Scher was a full-on member. Beausoleil, it's arguable whether he was or not, but he certainly became a member once he did some bad things. So she and Scher joined Manson's commune at the same time. She said Manson decided when we would eat, when we would sleep, when we would have sex, with whom we would have sex. According to Van Houten, she became, quote, saturated in acid. She couldn't even grasp the existence of those living in a non-psychedelic reality, and was telling the other girls at the time that they were on trial for their lives, I wonder how I'll hide the wings. I wonder if the wings will poke through my dress and people will be able to see them. She literally believed that she would become a fairy. She was
an angel. I think she was an angel. Pat Krenwinkel thought she was a fairy elf.
She'd be a fairy. Okay. Now here's the funny thing. By the way, Leslie Van Houten was known as several names. Luella Alexandria, Leslie Marie Sangston, Linda Sue Owens, and Lulu were names that she adopted in the family. False identities. She aggressively has implicated herself and said that at the time of this trial, said that Manson did not instruct her to do anything. She was acting of her own accord. She wanted to be part of the Helter Skelter movement. She truly believed in it, which is why she thought she was going to grow angel's wings. She is accused of stabbing Rosemary LaBianca in the lower back. 19 times, I think?
16 or 17 times. There is a caveat there. Rosemary LaBianca was already dead when Leslie Van Houten stabbed her.
Even though Van Houten did tie her up and restrain her and was part of restraining her while Tex Watson stabbed her.
Absolutely part of the murders. But she did not kill anyone. But she also went willingly when she found out about the Tate murders the night before. She is quoted saying, I was in awe of Pat Krenwinkel, Katie was her nickname, being able to have that much faith to go and do that, and she wanted to do it herself. She wanted
to be a part of it, yeah.
She was offered immunity and turned it down, and said that she did it all and Charlie did nothing. That's how
she was
wound in
completely
this she
under
was.
the spell of Manson, and she was, as she said, saturated in acid, which completely altered her thinking. She is still in prison. She is 70-something years old. This happened when she was a 19-year-old girl. That's the tragic part for me, that entire life and the lives of the people they hurt were all eliminated, wiped off, ruined forever because of the actions of Manson. You talked about Patricia Krenwinkel, also known as Katie. She was someone that met Manson in the 60s, in 67 in Manhattan Beach.
She was the third follower. First it was Sandra Good, then it was Lynette Fromm, and then Patricia Krenwinkel.
I believe Mary Bruner had also
come. Or Mary
come
Bruner
earlier.
Was first. That's who was first. I'm sorry.
That's all right. So Krenwinkel had a bit of a difficult childhood. She had an endocrine disorder, which caused her to have excessive body hair. She was overweight. And Manson was the first person in her life that had ever made her feel beautiful. She had sex with him the first night they met. She was the first. She said he was the first person who told her she was beautiful. So she lived a pretty normal life. She was born in 47. Insurance salesman as a father, homemaker as a mother. Her parents did get divorced. That is a common experience between the Manson girls.
All the girls, just about.
Within one semester of attending a Jesuit college, though, she dropped out, moved into her half sister's apartment, who was a heroin addict at the time,
and died a few years later.
Yes, died very shortly after that, and then she joined the Manson family. As the Manson family grew, Katie, as Patricia Krenwinkel had been then known, she said that they went on an 18-month tour of the American West in an old school bus that was basically a never-ending orgy. In the summer of 68, Krenwinkel and fellow family member Ella Bailey were hitchhiking around Los Angeles when Beach Boys founding member and drummer Dennis Wilson picked them up, which again led to eventually the whole Manson family moving into Wilson's pad, and that was Charlie's entrance in the music business, which we'll get into. She said in 1994, many years after all this had taken place, she says, "I wake up every day knowing I'm a destroyer I'm of the most precious thing, which is life. And I do that because that's what I deserve, is to wake up every morning and know that." She expressed extensive remorse for what she did to Abigail Folger, who was one of the Tate murder victims at Cielo Drive. She says Manson was absolutely lying about not ordering the murders. She said there wasn't one thing done that was even allowed to be done without his express permission. And her nicknames in the family, Big Patty, very unflattering name there.
Yeah.
Yellow, Marnie Reeves, and Mary Ann Scott, but the family knew her as Katie. So, Leah, as we have our 5-minute warning here before we got to end this segment, we're going to have to very briefly touch Beausoleil, Squeaky, and Sandra before we start the next section. However, talk about Susan Atkins, who is the most probably notorious of the girls. You talk about a woman who had so much rage, hate, violence, and insanity in her. Susan Atkins is downright terrifying.
Susan Atkins, and this is just my personal opinion, Susan Atkins and Tex Watson are the only two of the people that I believe would have killed someone eventually, with or without Charles Manson. Susan Atkins is more of a sociopath than Charles Manson. She is a horrible human being, and the world is a better place with her dead. She, her mother, she was born to alcoholics in the 1940s. I'm sorry, I don't have her birth date. I believe she was 20 at the time, so it would be around 1947, 48 when she was born. Both parents were alcoholics. Her mom died. Yep. Was it 48? Her mom died when she was in high school, young. Her mom died.
14 she was.
She talks about her brothers and her brother's friends molesting her quite often, starting at around 8 years old. And she ran away and she went to LA and she became a go-go dancer, and she was a stripper and sometimes prostitute. And she fell in with the Manson family that was at a place called the Spiral Staircase. It was a party flop house outside
where
of
Manson would sit and play the guitar.
Yes, where he met Bobby Beausoleil. It's also rumored, who is the guy that started the Satanist religion? Barbara Bush's
Anton LaVey.
No, Barbara Bush's dad.
Oh, yeah.
I can't think of
Aleister Crowley.
Aleister Crowley used to hang out there too, and he has ties to the Manson family. However,
Not Barbara Bush's father, by the way. That's a joke.
Yeah, that's a joke. Go back and listen to our old episodes. But that is where she met Manson, and she says that the moment she met him, she knew he was God, and that he was the devil himself. So God and the devil, which is something
Right.
Charlie used to say.
Manson tried to sell himself as a hybrid between God and the devil, Jesus and
Yes.
the devil. Real quick, Leah, she was known as several different names. Sadie Mae Glutz was her main alias, which led to a version of that. They used to call her Sexy Sadie. Which we'll get into a lot later because they said she was extremely promiscuous. But Sexy Sadie, for any Beatles fans out there, know that is a song from the White Album by John Lennon. Obviously, that goes into the connection here. She bore a son by a family member named Bruce White, and Manson named the son Zezazo Zadfrak Glutz.
That child went up for adoption, and she has not seen him since he was 1 year old.
That's right. She has had no contact with him since 1969. And Atkins was absolutely the most bloodthirsty of them all. We will get into that more in the next segment because we're coming back with the theory and the timeline around this whole Helter Skelter idea. Stay with us. Welcome back to the unholy trinity of cults. Our final subject, Charles Manson and the Manson family murders. And this is volume 1 of a 2-volume final episode of this 3-part series. I know that's a little confusing now, but Leah and I both agreed we could not do Manson in just one episode. So in this particular segment, we have a little bit of housekeeping to do. I want to talk about 2 other Manson family members very, very quickly, 3 actually, and then we're going to go into the Helter Skelter theory and the timeline. So real quick, let's just touch on them. Let's do a quick line or 2 each, but talk a little bit about Bobby Beausoleil if we could, Leah.
Bobby Beausoleil was a troubled kid. His nickname amongst the family members was Cupid because he was incredibly good looking. He had a kind of scruffy look, but he wasn't a hippie. He was more of like a rocker. He was a musician and he was good at it. And Charles Manson saw that. And Manson was jealous of him in some ways, but he brought him on board as his chief recruiter.
Because Beausoleil could get the girls. Manson could too, but Beausoleil it was like taking candy from a baby.
I mean, I would have totally joined the family for Bobby Beausoleil. So he brought in Leslie Van Houten and Catherine Scher, who are 2 really big members, and he was in the drug scene. He was kind of a floater.
He says he was a wannabe biker. Like when the Straight Satans were providing protection for the Manson family under Charles Manson's orders, Beausoleil was more interested in joining the Straight Satans than he was in joining the Manson family.
He was just kind of a young, wandering kid. Now, granted, he had a really, really bad childhood, not as bad as Manson, but close. He did go to juvenile detention. He spent some time in prison. And he just kind of fell into that crowd. And he also, I believe, is the reason for the murders. The true, real reason for the murders is Bobby Beausoleil to get him out of jail.
And that is what in our next, in volume 2 of this whole Manson finale, we are going to go into the theories around Bobby Beausoleil and how the murders were actually around him more than they were around any idea of Helter Skelter. But we'll get to that. I just wanted to introduce who Bobby Beausoleil was. The next one here, Sandra Good, was one of the Manson girls who was sitting outside with presenting a vigil for Manson and the girls while they were on trial. They sat there for months during the trial. They shaved their heads. They carved the X's into their face. Sandra Good was scary. If you see the 1969 version of Sandra Good, this very young girl, you can see the anger in her eyes.
She's still scary. She's still that way.
She's still that way, and she's also still a follower of Manson. Like, she's not given up on Manson being this guru that she followed. And she says that Manson had taught her about appreciation for nature and being one with the environment and stuff like that. So Sandra Good actually never lost her allegiance to to Charles Manson or the ideals that she learned in the family. And she, real quick, she eventually did go to prison, though, because her and another devotee were indicted for conspiracy to send threatening letters through the mail to to people that were guilty, she said, of corporate crimes against the environment. And she was sending threatening letters. She did 15 years in prison. She is currently a free woman, but she's not allowed to live in California, and she wasn't allowed to be near Manson before he died.
Really quickly, she was born to very wealthy parents, and that was the ticket with Manson. He used her for her money for a very long time. And she was also born with a kidney disorder and had scars all over her body. And again, Manson was the first person to tell her she was beautiful, and he made her believe that her parents hated her, and that's why they allowed doctors to cut her up.
And the last girl that I really would be remiss without mentioning here is Lynette Alice Squeaky Frome.
Probably the most famous, even more so than the murderers.
Well, and Squeaky is batshit crazy.
Out of her fucking mind.
She is loony. This is a woman who 10 years after, or 5 years rather, after the Manson convictions, she went to prison for attempting to assassinate President Gerald Ford when he was in California. And for that crime, she was sentenced to life in prison.
My kind of girl.
She was released.
Well, she was the one that said that she thought Manson was a psychic. She thought he was a guru. She admits to deeply falling in love and being obsessed with Manson. And when she was asked years and years later, when she had a boyfriend and everything else, and she was living this, sort of normal-ish life, she said that she was still in love with Charles Manson decades after he was in prison. If you listen to her now, she is a free woman now, finally. But it took 30 years for her to get out?
About 35 years. And she ended up marrying one of the Manson groupies that joined his cult once he went to prison. That's who she's married to.
They lived in a house decorated with skulls. And in a 2019 interview, she said, when the question was asked, "Are you still in love with Charlie?" She says, "Yeah, I still am." So there is Squeaky. If you see footage of Squeaky, you will see how scary she actually is. Again,
but kind of cute. She's adorable too.
A lot of the Manson women were attractive women. It was just that you could see in their eyes this hatred, this animalistic penchant almost for going off and getting violent. You can smell it on a lot of them.
Yeah.
But anyway, I just wanted to round out there. We're going to move on now to the timeline. So really quick, we have about 25 more minutes to go into this. I'm going to give you as expansive a view as I possibly can.
I'll be as quiet as possible. Go.
The sources for this breakdown are Helter Skelter, The True Story of the Manson Murders by Vincent Bugliosi, who was the DA, along with Kurt Gentry. Will You Die for Me by Charles Watson, who was Tex Watson, and My Life with Charles Manson by Paul Watkins. Also a source for this is the testimony of Paul Watkins and what he told the DA. So really quick, the Helter Skelter scenario is a theory put forth by Vincent Bugliosi and others. Bugliosi was not the first one that came up with this. He was the lead prosecutor in the Tate LaBianca murder trial, and this was the theory he used to explain the murders committed by the Manson family. He believed that Charles Manson had been predicting racial war for some time before he used the actual term Helter Skelter. First use of the term may have been at a gathering of the family on New Year's Eve in 1968 at Myers Ranch in Death Valley. Basically, it's this: black men would be deprived of. Black men would rise up because of the injustice against them in the political climate of the late 60s. Whites would become frightened about what the blacks were going to do. Remember, this was the time of the militant groups like Black Panthers and stuff. There was a lot of fear out there, and the white men would retaliate, and there would be a race war that the Manson family would have to hide from. And this is according to Paul Watkins. Was a Manson family member who eventually left the group.
One of his top guys. There were very few men in the group. That's important to know. There was only about 4 or 5 at any given time.
And most of them were either meaningless hangers-on or lieutenants.
Exactly.
One or the other. He said they would emerge from the underground. The family would emerge from the underground to rule the blacks, who, as the vision went, would be incapable of running the world. At that point, Manson, quote, would scratch the black man's fuzzy head, kick him in the butt, and tell him to go pick cotton and go be a good word I will not say. So the term Helter Skelter is actually from a Beatles song of the same name, comes from the White Album, which this doesn't really matter for the story, but that is my all-time favorite Beatles album. What a fantastic work of art.
Great album.
I love it. I love the White Album so much. But when the White Album came out, Charlie listened to it over and over and over again. He was quite certain that the Beatles had tapped into his spirit, the truth of the world, and everything that was going to come down, and that the black man was going to rise. So we're going to go through some of the connections that acid-laden Charles Manson made and then preached to his followers. But Manson and his followers began preparing for Helter Skelter in the months before they committed the murders. They worked on songs for the hoped-for album, which they anticipated would set off everything. They prepared vehicles and dune buggies and other items that would be used in their escape from the LA area, their home territory, to Death Valley out in the desert when the days of violence arrived. Some would argue Manson wanted to get the hell out of Dodge and was going to get as far away as he could, and that's the reason they went out there. But let's talk a little bit about these. Paul Watkins wrote that Manson spent hours quoting and interpreting Revelation, which is a book of the in the New Testament of the Bible, and particularly the verses from Revelation chapter 9 or Revelation 9.
And he tied it to the White Album because I believe it's the last song on the album is Revolution 9.
Right, that's the penultimate song on the album, and it's called Revolution 9. And he got, Manson probably more than any other song got messages from that, which is essentially a sound collage. Beatles fans at the time most hated it because it was it freaks me out. It's weird. It's weird. But anyway, Paul Watkins admits to thinking Charlie Manson was Christ. Tex Watson admits to thinking that Manson was Christ. So let's talk about some of the songs on the White Album and what Manson got out of them. There's a song by Paul McCartney called I Will. Here's the lyrics. And when at last I find you, your song will fill the air. Sing it loud so I can hear you. Make it easy to be near you. Meaning, according to Manson, the Beatles are looking and calling out for Jesus Christ. The song Honey Pie. Oh, honey pie, my position is tragic. Come and show me the magic of your Hollywood song. Meaning the Beatles know Jesus Christ has returned to Earth in the form of Charles Manson, and he is living in L.A. They want Manson to create his, quote, song, and that is the album that will set off Helter Skelter. So consequence of Manson thinking that, Manson and his female followers attempted to contact the Beatles by letter, telegram, and telephone. They were struggling to make clear to the Beatles that it is they who are supposed to cross the Atlantic and join the family in Death Valley.
Because that was going to happen.
Skipping over a couple here, let's talk about Sexy Sadie. Manson had renamed family member Susan Atkins Sadie Mae Glutz long before the release of the White Album. This served to reinforce the mental connection Manson felt he had with the Beatles, and the rest of the family thought, holy shit, he's been calling her Sadie way before the White Album came out, so he must be psychic, right?
And she's the sexy one. Yeah. Right,
she's the sexy one. And more so because of the amount of it that she had, according to some family members.
Right.
That was more what made Atkins more looked like... Atkins wasn't even hot crazy. She was just fucking crazy looking.
Yeah, scary crazy.
Right. Rocky Raccoon, which was a song by McCartney. Obviously, raccoon can also be a vulgar term, or the shortened version of the word coon could be a vulgar term used in a racist way against blacks. Of all the Beatles songs known to have been connected with Helter Skelter, this is the only one that mentions the Bible. It mentions Gideon's Bible.
Yep.
And Manson made the connection in the period before his trial. He was visited at the LA County Jail by David Dalton and David Felton, who were preparing a Rolling Stone story about him. And according to recounting the visit to Manson, Dalton said they relayed the remarks Manson made to Felton about him, about Rocky Raccoon. Coon, said Charlie, you know, that's a word they use for black people. You know the line, Gideon checked out and left no doubt to help good Rocky's revival? Rocky's revival, it means coming back to life. The black man is going to come into power again. Gideon checks out, meaning that it's all written out there in the New Testament in the book of Revelation. Blackbird, another McCartney song. Blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these broken wings and learn to fly. All your life you were only waiting for this moment to arise. Meaning for the Manson family was the black man was going to arise and overthrow the white man. The Beatles are programming blacks to rise. In detailing, I'll leave that part out. Happiness is a Warm Gun was a John Lennon song. Beatles are telling blacks to get guns and fight whites. That's the significance. The sample lyric, when I hold you.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. I was just going to say, when I hold you in my arms, I feel my finger on your trigger. I know no one can do me no harm because happiness is a warm gun. While in Death Valley after New Year's Eve gathering, Manson announced Helter Skelter. The family played over and over the White Album's 5 following songs. They were Blackbird, which we just mentioned, Helter Skelter, Piggies, which The lyric is, what they need's a damn good whacking. The significance the blacks were going to give the piggies, for example, the establishment,
Yes.
a damn good whacking. This is a phrase Manson particularly liked and talked about often. Everywhere there's lots of piggies living piggy lives. You can see them out for dinner with their piggy wives, clutching forks and knives to eat their bacon. Bugliosi said that when Lino LaBianca was killed, there was a fork that was stabbed through his throat. And Bugliosi made the point that he was in the stomach. Well, they carved war in his stomach and they stabbed a knife through his neck. Bugliosi made the connection to the song Piggies. And then, of course, Helter Skelter, which is really about an English amusement park ride. That's what it's actually about.
It's about a roller coaster. Mm-hmm.
Yes, a roller coaster, right. And, Paul McCartney was not writing end of the world dystopian race war songs when he wrote Helter Skelter. It was a great and one of the first heavy metal songs, really a rockin' song. But when I get to the bottom, I go back to the top of the slide where I stop and I turn and I go for a ride. Significance, the reference to the family's emergence from the bottomless pit, the underground Death Valley hideaway. In British English, although Helter Skelter has the meaning of confused or confusedly, it's more commonly the name of an amusement park ride, which we just mentioned. Okay, lyric, look out, Helter Skelter, she's coming down fast. Yes, she is. That meant the upcoming explosion of race-based violence is imminent. These are the last few months, weeks, perhaps days of the old order. In trial testimony, okay, I can skip over some of that. Even to someone unaware that Helter Skelter is the name of a slide, the song's mention of a slide might have indicated that she, in this part of the lyrics, was someone who literally or otherwise is riding down a slide, coming down fast. Paul Watkins makes it clear that Manson construed she as a reference to the words Helter Skelter themselves. So she was the event of the race.
She was or in, depending on who you talk to, it also was she is them being underground and the war happening above them.
Right. Now,
well,
Revolution
miles
9,
above you. Sorry.
Yeah, but miles above you, another line in the song, you're right. Revolution 9, so we spoke about this earlier. This is the big, about 9-minute sound collage, very avant-garde, offering by the Beatles here, John Lennon composition, or experiment, really. But let's talk about some of the, some of what happened in this quote, song. Manson hears machine gun fire, the oinking of pigs, the word rise yelled over and over again. The piece's audio representation of the coming conflict, the repeated utterance of number 9 as reference to chapter 9 of the book of Revelation, the prophecy, Revolution 9 is prophecy according to Manson, paralleling Revelation 9. Rise is one of Manson's big words. The black man is going to rise up against the white man. Manson could also hear the Beatles whispering. Now, he was hearing this while on acid listening to this shit. He said, Charlie, Charlie, send us a telegram. And apparently, approximately 3:45, the recording of voice could be heard that is that of George Harrison, does in fact seem to be saying something about a telegram. In his autobiography text, Watson also tied the prophecy to Everybody's Got Something to Hide Except Me and My Monkey, another song on the White Album.
And they used to call Charlie Monkey. That was his nickname, the Monkey. Mm-hmm.
Right. So again, he saw significance there. So that was what they were getting out of the White Album. Now let's talk about what Manson was getting. We got about 15 minutes left here, a little less. So we're going to go through the Book of Revelation connections and then briefly hit the timeline here in the next 13 or so minutes that we have. But let's talk about the parts of the Book of Revelation that Manson pulled from and preached. Now, Leslie Van Houten said that Charlie Manson would get them all on acid and he would reenact the crucifixion.
Yes.
Okay? And he would terrify them all. And then he'd talk all this shit about the Book of Revelation and the race war and Helter Skelter, the White Album, and they'd be listening to all this shit on acid for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. Imagine what that would do to young, impressionable people over time, especially at the behest of this very big personality cult leader type guy.
Abusive too. They were afraid of him at this point.
Yes.
That took a while before the violence started, but he started hitting the women. She also says about the crucifixion how realistic it was because they were on so much acid. It's important to note that Manson realized early on that he would take either less acid than everyone else or none at all because he wanted to be sane and be able to control their thoughts.
That's right. So thank you for that. You were helping me so much with this because I have so many freaking notes, and when you clarify things, it makes it a lot easier. So let's talk about this. So chapter 7 in Revelation, verse 4, as I heard the number of them which were sealed, and there were sealed 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel. 144,000 would be the membership of the family when, in Helter Skelter's aftermath, they would emerge from the bottomless pit to rule. That's how many there would be.
And that's how he got people to recruit.
It would be our world then. There would be no one else except for us and the black servants. It's difficult to determine how the family's numbers was to grow to 144,000. In his autobiography, Tex Watson seems to think that the growth was somehow simply to be a result of procreation. The trial testimony of Paul Watkins, on the other hand, seems to indicate the increase was to result from the release of the family's album, which would draw the young love back to the group, and they would get more followers, which would be family members. Chapter 9, verses 2 and 3, and he opened, now this is the big one for Manson, remember, Revelation 9. And he opened up the bottomless pit, and there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. The locusts were the Beatles. As the scorpions of the earth have power, the power of the scorpion, that is Manson, a Scorpio, will prevail. The bottomless pit, as noted above, the underground city in which the family will ride out of the ravages of Helter Skelter. The family would be lowered into this by means of a gold rope. According to Manson, accordingly, Manson bought expensive gold rope at a Santa Monica sporting goods store. Verses 7 and 8, and the locusts' face were as the faces of men, and they had hair as the hair of women, a reference to the Beatles and their long hair. Verse 17, and thus I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire and of jacinth and brimstone, and the heads of the horses were as the heads of lions, and out of their mouth issued fire and smoke and brimstone. The breastplates of fire, according to Paul Watkins, was the Beatles' electric guitars. The fire and the smoke and brimstone out of their mouths, that's the Beatles' powerful lyrics and the power of their music to ignite Helter Skelter. The shapes of the locusts in verse 7 were like unto horses prepared unto battle. Things that are shaped like unto horses prepared into battle. The dune buggies the family would be riding during Helter Skelter. They were driving around these dune buggies like it was Mad Max out in the desert. In Manson's view, the dune buggies were the ideal vehicles of the apocalypse because they would enable the family to outrun the police in the bottomless pit okay, so I can skip over some of that. So Catherine Scher, who you mentioned earlier, former girlfriend of Bobby Beausoleil, she was in some adult films. She was a Manson family member. She said, Charlie talked about Helter Skelter every night. We'd learn to live off the land. We'd live in the desert and come in on dune buggies and rescue the orphaned white babies. We'd be the saviors. Verse 15, and the 4 angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year for to slay the third part of men. The 4 angels equaled the Beatles, prophets who were preparing the way for Jesus Christ, aka Manson, to lead the chosen people away to safety. Slays the third part of men, and that is meaning destroy the white race. Verse 16, and the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000, and I heard the number of them, 200,000 horsemen, motorcycle gang, members Manson is attempting to recruit the family in advance of Helter Skelter. Okay, so just want to make sure I don't miss anything else major here. This goes on quite a while. Verse 10, I'm skipping over a lot, but chapter 21, verse 10 and 18. And an angel carried me away in the spirit to a great and high mountain and showed me that great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God, and the city was pure gold, like unto clear glass. And the 12 gates were 12 pearls. Every several gate was of 1 pearl, and the street of the city was pure gold, and as it were transparent glass. The city had no need of the sun, neither of the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof. The family's Helter Skelter sanctuary under Death Valley would be the city of gold, where there would be no sun and no moon. Okay, so to Manson, the synthesis of the Beatles and the Bible is incredibly hard to question. This is what he preached to these people, and at least Leslie Van Houten and probably the other two believed this shit when they went to kill at the behest of Tex Watson, who was operating at the behest of Manson. So very briefly, in the last 3 minutes we have here in this segment, I want to just say that okay, here's a quick timeline of events that are relevant to this. Okay. Mm-hmm. 1967, Charles Manson at 32 is released from Terminal Island Prison. That summer, he and the first members of what will become known as the family leave the San Francisco area in an old school bus they modified hippie style. November 27th, the Beatles album Magical Mystery Tour is released. The family will come to call its geographical and psychological movement in the school bus the Magical Mystery Tour. 1968, April 4th, MLK is assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. Late spring, having ended up in L.A. after months of roaming through the West Coast, Manson and the family become associated with the Beach Boys' Dennis Wilson after Wilson picks up 2 female family members. We already talked about that. Dennis Wilson also introduces Manson to his friend Terry Melcher, a record producer and the son of Doris Day, who had worked not only with the Beach Boys but also with the Byrds, Paul Revere and the Raiders, the Mamas and the Papas, etc. Greg Jacobson, another music industry friend of Dennis Wilson, paid for studio time to record songs written and performed by Manson. 3 weeks before the lease on his house is to run out, Dennis Wilson, who has had about enough of the Manson family at this point, they had become hangers-on and loafers, and he was starting to feel some danger there. Real quick, Dennis Wilson actually used one of Charles Manson's songs called Cease to Exist, and he changed the lyrics of it, and I think it was called like Never Afraid to Love or Never Not to Love or something like that.
Never Learn Not to Love.
Right, Never Learn Not to Love, which he put on the Beatles album, or the Beach Boys album 2020. And Manson was to say he was pissed about this and not getting much of any money for it, and also having the lyrics changed. Manson became, you could say, murderously angry about that.
Yeah, Wilson took the writing credit, and all he did was change the word brother to lover. That is in the title. That's all he did.
So having been consolidated at the end of October, having been consolidated at Spawn Ranch since the eviction from Dennis Wilson's house, the family members set out in a new school bus toward Death Valley to set up an alternate base, which was actually Catherine Gillies, a family member, her grandmother's house out in the desert, I believe is where they moved.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to skip over a little bit here. We move into New Year's Eve of 68, around a campfire on a bitter cold night at the Myers Ranch, the family members listen as Manson lays out the prophecy of Helter Skelter. In 69, word comes from Manson on January 10th. He's in L.A. The family is to move from the desert to a house he's found in Canoga Park. Mid-February, while riding in a car with Paul Watkins, Manson sees a white woman and black man holding hands on the streets. He explains to Watkins at that time that's why black men have not yet risen up, because they're being pacified with access to white women. So Terry Melcher, who we mentioned was the record producer, son of Doris Day, Terry Melcher actually used to live in the house that was now occupied at this point by Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski, the film director, and that was 150 Cielo Drive. Manson, on March 23rd of 69, gets a cool reception from a male friend of Sharon Tate who was living there with her husband, Roman Polanski. Tate looked on. Manson, who possibly knew Melcher no longer lived at the place, had come calling for someone and is told to check the guest house. After briefly going back to the guest house, he leaves. In the evening, he enters the property again. He's received with an equal lack of enthusiasm at the guest house. And so it's possible that Manson had met Tate briefly before the murders, which is just kind of creepy to think about. April 1st, the family starts settling back into the Spawn Ranch, which they had quit after owner George Spawn, under pressure from the police, had shut down. In a dispute over money on July 27th, family member Bobby Beausoleil acts on Manson's instruction to murder family acquaintance Gary Hinman after trying to shake him down for money. And after stabbing Hinman to death, Beausoleil wrote "Political Piggy," or one of the people there wrote "Political Piggy" on the wall in Hinman's blood. We're going to end it there for now on the timeline. When we come back, we're going to do a high-level overview of the main murders here, and we're going to talk about the trial in the final segment, which is coming right at you after this. Welcome back, Teat Army. Thank you for your attention and your enthusiasm that some of you have shared with us about the unholy trinity of cults, of which this program today is volume 1 of our 3rd episode, the Manson Family. And we left off with the timeline of the Helter Skelter theory postulated by the DA Vincent Bugliosi, who later wrote the book Helter Skelter. And we're going to finish that off real quick and then talk about the trial in our final segment for this volume 1 of Manson. So let's talk about Gary Hinman. This is where things go really bad, no matter what theory you believe about Manson and the family and the murders. Hinman was a music teacher. He was a student at UCLA, and he was an acquaintance of the Manson family. He was a hanger-on, kind of like Beausoleil was. He is actually a former roommate of Bobby Beausoleil. So the long and the short of this story is that the straight Satans who Manson had hired for security for the Manson family actually bought drugs from Bobby Beausoleil, and Bobby Beausoleil had gotten these drugs from Gary Hinman. It was mescaline.
Yep.
But the mescaline had made the straight Satan sick.
Which is what masculine does, but they didn't know that.
According to Catherine Scher, I believe it was when she was discussing this, mescaline empties you out before it gets you high.
It does.
So that but these bikers thought they had some bad drugs. So now they wanted Beausoleil to get them their fucking money back, and Beausoleil no longer had their money. Gary Hinman had it. Mm-hmm. So Beausoleil went to see Hinman, and he brought along Mary Bruner, the first Manson girl, and Susan Atkins. And they went to Hinman's home on July 25th of 69. Initially there are some that say they were trying to convince him to join the family full time and turn over all his assets. It became more and more threatening of a situation where they were basically telling Hinman, we need our money back. I got to pay these guys. Hinman said, I don't have it anymore. There was also this inheritance that Hinman reportedly had access to that they were after. Mm-hmm. Long story short, this starts to get worse and worse, and Hinman's not giving him any money. Beausoleil saying, we're not leaving without money. My ass is on the line now with these bikers. And it escalated. Eventually, Charles Manson was called and told about the situation. He randomly showed up at the door, and as soon as Hinman let him in and said, hey, Charlie, Charles Manson sliced him across the face. Reportedly cut off a portion of his ear, sliced a portion of his ear very badly. At that point, the bad situation turned into a really, really bad situation. Beausoleil, so Manson left after this. Beausoleil calls him over a day later. He spent 2 days in Gary Hinman's apartment not knowing what the fuck to do. And he called Manson and said, what am I supposed to do? Manson reportedly said, you know as well as I do what you need to do.
Uh-huh.
And at that point, Beausoleil, feeling he had no other way out, made a horrible mistake and stabbed Gary Hinman to death. Before that had happened, they had eventually convinced Hinman to sign over the pink slips of his 2 vehicles that he had to recoup at least some of the money that he owed the Straight Satans. Well, Beausoleil stupidly took one of the cars as a getaway car, a car he was later arrested in.
With the murder weapon inside the car.
Yeah, so he might have been good looking, but he certainly wasn't good thinking.
It was not right.
So August 6th, Beausoleil is arrested after he's caught driving Hinman's car. The knife he used to stab Hinman is found on the car's tire as well, which Leah just mentioned. August 8th in the afternoon, Manson tells the family members, now is the time for Helter Skelter. Mm-hmm. August 9th, after midnight, acting on Manson's instructions, 3 family members, including Tex Watson, murder Sharon Tate and 4 other people on the premises of 1050 Cielo Drive. August 10th.
The names are Abigail Folger, Wojtek Forkowski, Brian Parent, who was not inside the house.
Stephen Parent.
Stephen Parent, and Tate's ex-boyfriend, Jay Sebring.
Right. And in fact, a creepy little detail, Abigail Folger, the Tate house was a bit of a party house. Obviously, you can imagine a beautiful young starlet, and Roman Polanski lived there. And when the family members dressed all in black walked by the room that Abigail Folger was laying on the bed and reading, she looked up at them and waved.
Yes.
Just thinking they were hangers-on that had come to party or whatever. August 10th, after midnight, 3 family members acting on Manson's instructions murder the couple Leno and Rosemary LaBianca, upper middle class, really upper middle class, wealthy supermarket chain owners. Mm-hmm. So the Tate murders, let's talk about them in a little bit of detail here. So the people that went, Patricia Krenwinkel, Susan Atkins, Tex Watson, and Linda Kasabian, someone we have not mentioned.
I was just going to say we didn't do her.
But Linda had only been with the family for under a month. She had a young child that was on the commune at the time of these murders. She was the lookout. She stayed in the car. She stayed behind in the car and looked out. She eventually became the lead witness for the prosecution.
The only reason she was asked to go along is because she was the only person with a valid driver's license. They needed that.
That's that's later what they had said. As Leah noted, Wojciech Frykowski was the boyfriend was a friend of Roman Polanski, a Polish gentleman. He was Abigail Folger, who was the heiress to the Folger coffee fortune. He was her boyfriend. And Jay Sebring, who had a girlfriend at the time, but had been in a previous relationship with Sharon Tate, was very close with Sharon Tate. And
possibly still in love with her.
Yes, some say that he was very possibly still in love with her. You're right. Steve Parent, the unlucky person that he was just an 18-year-old kid out there to try to sell a clock radio to the caretaker of the property, a young gentleman named William Garrettson, who eventually was the first suspect that cops picked up and thought he had done the murders. But Steve Parent was just trying to sell a clock radio to Garrettson. The wrong place at the wrong time. Tex Watson pointed a .22 caliber revolver at him. As Parent begged him not to do anything, says, I won't tell anybody I saw you, shot him 4 times at point blank range. All right, so at Watson's direction, Atkins found the other 3 occupants with Krenwinkel's help. Krenwinkel literally ran down Abigail Folger on the lawn.
And when she was stabbing her, Krenwinkel later said that Abigail Folger at one point said, please stop stabbing me. I'm already dead.
Yeah. What an unbelievable thing to think about.
That's how many times she stabbed her.
Wojciech Frykowski was also run down by Tex Watson on the lawn. Those 2 were murdered both on the lawn. The level of overkill in these murders was unbelievable. So Atkins found Tate and Sebring and attempted to put a noose around both of their necks and hang it over one of the very tall ceiling beams and basically hang them together. Sebring fought back very early on and was stabbed to death and bludgeoned by Tex Watson. Initially, Susan Atkins admitted to being the one that killed Sharon Tate, even saying that she tasted Sharon Tate's blood and thought about...
Go ahead. I was going to. She claimed that she climaxed while killing her. That she enjoyed it so much she had an orgasm.
And Atkins said a lot of shit over the years that she changed or contradicted. Most people believe that Tex Watson was actually the one that killed Susan Atkins, and we're not sure what to believe from. Killed Sharon Tate. We're not sure what to believe from Susan Atkins, but she claimed to have drank Sharon Tate's blood. We know she took Tate's blood and used it as finger paint on the door to write the word pig.
Yes.
Anyway, she was called the Vampirus by Vince Bugliosi during the trial because of this admission that she had tasted the blood of Sharon Tate's. But anyway, they were all bludgeoned to death in a senseless killing in the former house of the man that had rejected Charles Manson's attempt to break into the music business, Terry Melcher. Some believe that Manson chose that house on purpose, even knowing that Melcher didn't live there anymore, because he wanted them to know we could get you.
Scaring him. It's also one thing really quick is one of the things Manson did before the murders to prepare them for it. He would take them on what he called creepy crawl missions. It would break into the houses of famous wealthy people, and they would just mess with stuff. They didn't steal anything. They would just move furniture around.
Just so people knew they were there.
And they did it to Terry Melcher, and they stole a green eyeglass of some sort because they wanted to. And then 3 days later was the Tate LaBianca murders.
And it's funny because it was really just conditioning from Manson to get them used to this, to breaking in, the entering, and the burglary, and then he just had to turn on their killer switch, which he eventually was able to do, according to the Helter Skelter hypothesis here. And really, even according to the alternate theories, Manson was still leading people to kill.
Absolutely.
So one very morbid detail here, when Watson arrived, Frykowski asked him what he was doing there, and Watson replied with the now famous quote, "I'm the devil, and I'm here to do the devil's business." So
sick.
One night later, the LaBianca murders take place. So Kasabian was once again there, but she left with Manson later on, and it was actually Van Houten, Krenwinkel, and Watson that went in this time to do the actual killing. And we talked about it a little bit. Leno, he was stabbed a total of 12 times. The word war was carved into his abdomen by Patricia Krenwinkel. A knife was put through the right side of his neck and actually traversed the left side of his neck with the end of the blade, according to Stephen Kay of the prosecution. And Rosemary LaBianca was stabbed multiple times, 16 times or 17 times by Van Houten alone, reportedly after she had already been deceased by being killed by Tex Watson, who stabbed her to death after Krenwinkel and Van Houten had restrained her, tied her up. Van Houten claimed at trial that Rosemary LaBianca was dead when she stabbed her. Evidence showed many of the 41 stab wounds that she eventually received had been inflicted post-mortem. Watson was walking around with a bayonet during this murder scene. So this is absolute madness that you're talking about. On the walls, they wrote "Rise" and "Death to Pigs" in the blood of Leno LaBianca. Helter Skelter, misspelled, was actually written on the refrigerator door by Patricia Krenwinkel.
Because she's dumb. She spelled it Helter Skelter.
Helter Skelter, yes. And meanwhile, Manson, as I said, drove the other three family members, Grogan and Kasabian, back to Venice, the home of an actor. He left them there and then drove back to Spawn Ranch, leaving them and the LaBianca's killers to hitchhike home, if you can believe that. Manson wanted his followers to murder the actor in his apartment, but Kasabian allegedly thwarted the murder by deliberately knocking on the wrong door and waking a stranger, and the group then abandoned the plan and fled. All right, so those were the brutal murders, and because Sharon Tate was the wife of Roman Polanski, she had been a kind of a mid-level actress. She had been in The Valley of the Dolls. She was the Vampire Killers, and she was her star was just starting to rise. Anyway, the Tate murders became national news because of Polanski's celebrity. So we're going to move on here. The police for several months, I believe it was 10 months, didn't have anything to go on. And Susan Atkins actually blew the whistle on the whole thing because she was already incarcerated not only for car theft, but for the murder of Gary Hinman, which she admitted she was there for and complicit. She told two of her cellmates, her dormitory mates at this women's correctional facility, she had told them what had happened with the Tate LaBianca murders, and she confessed to the killing in great detail. One of those women, and I don't have her name at the ready, Virginia. Do you remember her last name? Virginia.
I don't remember her
Virginia
last name. Graham.
That's who it was. And Ronnie Howard. And eventually they reported Atkins' testimony to the police, and now everybody knew who was responsible for these now infamous murders that were all over the place. LA, the Hollywood Hills, that whole area was living in a state of fear and paranoia because they didn't know if their house was going to be next. Now these crazy hippies had been left off the loose, and now they're killing people. These flower children and are killing people. Imagine at the time what you would have thought. So we got to skip ahead here because there's so much. We got to give you the high level. Let's talk about the trial. The prosecution's main witness initially was supposed to be Susan Atkins. They were going to let her plea down to second-degree murder if she was willing to recount her story that she had told her inmates at the women's correctional facility. Well, after Manson got in her head just a tiny little bit, Atkins denied everything. She said she lied about everything. She made it all up. So Kasabian became
before Kasabian, they offered it to Leslie Van Houten, and then when they were being tried together, Manson somehow got to her through her lawyer, and she turned the immunity deal down because she was the only one that didn't actually commit a murder.
Her legal team kept trying to separate her from the other two and from Manson and try her on her own because she had the best chance probably at gaining currying favor with the jury.
Yes.
Because, she didn't actually kill Rosemary LaBianca herself, and she was this, homecoming queen, and she had been led astray, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, the main witness was Kasabian. They were charged with Manson, Atkins, and Krenwinkel have been charged with 7 counts of murder and conspiracy. Kasabian, by all accounts, did not participate in the killing. She was granted full immunity for the crimes. Initially, the judge had granted Manson permission to act as his own attorney, but because of his crazy conduct, including all kinds of pretrial motions, horseplay in the court, he eventually was. Go ahead.
At one point, he used to make the girls stand up and say things.
He would make them sing songs.
It was all scripted by Charlie every day. And at one point, he even jumped over, I believe it was Richard Nixon had said that Charles Manson was guilty. The next day,
Nixon had done a quick speech at a law enforcement gathering, and he had brought up the Manson murders, and he had said basically Manson was guilty, whether directly or indirectly.
There was a paper. The headline said Nixon, Manson guilty.
Right.
And Charles Manson held that up.
One of the defense attorneys snuck it into the courtroom, and Manson held it up to the jury, trying to cause a mistrial.
And when he didn't, he lunged and tried to attack the judge.
Right. So the judge, Charles Older, would not go with this tactic on Manson's part, and he did not allow a mistrial to occur. On the first day of Manson's testimony, he appeared with an X carved into his forehead, and he said that I've X'd myself out of your world. A short while later, every one of the girls had carved an X into their forehead, burned it into their forehead. There was allowed to be a lot of communication between the girls and Manson even after they had been arrested, which is how all these hijinks got planned. And eventually, Manson turned the X on his forehead into a swastika. The Manson girls sitting out front holding the vigil outside the courtroom had all carved X's into their heads. Then Manson arranged for himself and all the girls to shave their heads. And they walked into courtroom bald, singing and bald.
And then, as did the girls on the street.
As did the girls on the street, carved the X's in their heads and shaved their heads. Some family members attempted to dissuade other witnesses from testifying. There were threats made to Paul Watkins, among others.
Ruth Ann Morehouse was dosed with acid in a hamburger to try and make her go crazy.
Well, actually, that was Barbara Hood?
Barbara Hoyt. I'm sorry.
Hoyt, yes.
I get her and Ruth Ann Morehouse mixed up for some reason.
But Ruth Ann Morehouse was involved, as was Catherine Scher, and they both eventually did some jail time for it, as was Squeaky, I believe. Mm-hmm. They overdosed 10 doses of acid in Barbara Hoyt, who was a witness for the prosecution, former family member, and she almost died from that. But she did end up surviving it. So the conviction ended up, after all, this thing was a circus of all circuses. The jury returned guilty verdicts against all 4 defendants on each of the 27 separate counts. The jurors saw at last that Manson, in the prosecution's view, had planned to present Atkins, Krenwinkel, and Van Houten testified the murders had been conceived as copycat versions of the Hinman murder, for which Atkins now took credit. The killings, they said, were intended to draw suspicion away from Bobby Beausoleil, which we're going to go into a lot in the next episode, that this was all about getting Beausoleil out of prison by doing copycat murders while he was in prison that he could not possibly have committed. Midway through the penalty phase, Manson, as I mentioned, shaved his head, trimmed his beard to a fork. The effort to exonerate Manson via the copycat scenario failed, and on March 29, 1971, the jury returned verdicts of death against all 4 defendants on all counts. So very quickly at the end here, on the day the verdicts recommending the death penalty were returned, news came that the badly decomposed body of Ronald Hughes, who was one of Leslie Van Houten's attorneys, kind of a hippie lawyer, he was found wedged between 2 boulders in Ventura County, and some believe that he was killed by the Manson family because of Charles Manson taking an extreme disliking to him. As Leah mentioned much earlier in the show, the death sentences were all commuted to life in prison, and every one of these people, Watson, Krenwinkel, Van Houten, Atkins, Manson, Beausoleil, all of them have never left prison.
Mary Bruner, too. She's in prison for the Hinman murder.
Okay, I forgot about that one. The only person who ever was out for any length of time was Van Houten, because her lawyers had gotten her a retrial at one point.
Because her lawyer died in the middle of the trial and she couldn't get proper representation.
Right, so she was able to actually be retried. So she spent a year on the outside. Eventually, she was convicted all over again and spent the rest of her life in prison after that.
Her second trial was a hung jury, and then they had to retry her a third time where she was found guilty again.
Right. So obviously, Atkins died in prison. She did by that point. She was married. She had one of her legs amputated. She was in very poor health. Arnold Schwarzenegger at the time denied a mercy release. Just said due to the nature of the crimes, mercy release would not apply in this case. She ended up dying in prison.
Brain tumor.
Manson died in prison of colon cancer in 2017. We talked about that a little bit. After the fact, the Shorty Shea murder had taken place. After these convictions, they were all convicted in the Shorty Shea. All the people involved were convicted in the Shorty Shea case and had time tacked on. So I do have to go to the end here and talk about Manson's testimony about Helter Skelter. He said it means literally, it doesn't mean war with anything. It means confusion, literally. It is a conspiracy that he said in his in his statement, is it a conspiracy that the music's telling the youth to rise up against the establishment because the establishment is rapidly destroying things? Is that a conspiracy? The music speaks to you every day, but you are too deaf, dumb, and blind to even listen to the music. It's not my conspiracy. It's not my music. I hear what it relates. It says rise. It says kill. Why blame it on me? I didn't write the music. As far as lining up someone for some kind of a Helter Skelter trip, that's the district attorney's motive. That's the only thing he could find for a motive to throw up on top of all that confusion he had. There was no such thing in my mind as Helter Skelter. And here, which we'll round out the show with for now, we're going to hear a clip from Manson himself talking about this about 12 years after the convictions. He's in jail doing an interview with Channel 3 NBC, and it's about a 1-minute clip, which we'll just play at the end here. But next week, we are going to come back and tell the other side of this. What if it were true that these Tate LaBianca killings, that the Hinman murder was an accident that got out of hand, that the Tate LaBianca murders were copycat murders, that Helter Skelter was something that Charlie talked some rap about to his girls, but he never believed in it. There never was going to be a race war. This was all about Charlie. We'll also talk about his interaction with Lotsa Papa, the drug dealer, who Charles Manson did actually shoot, which we'll talk about in the next segment, which leads to an alternate theory that basically he was scared for his life of the Black Panthers. This is how the motorcycle gang got involved. The Beausoleil thing happened, and everything that happened subsequently to that was to cover Charlie Manson's ass and to try to get Beausoleil out of prison. That'll be the next episode that we talk about all this. In the meantime, as I just share this audio with you quickly, so Manson is talking like a choir boy here because he had just been let back into general population. He was hooked up with the preacher in the prison, and that's the guy you're getting here. But he's asked about Helter Skelter, and here's what he says to round things out.
In your everyday doings?
Let's talk about Helter Skelter. Bugliosi paints you as a small would-be pop singer, as he describes it, of little talent. How do you react to that?
Bugliosi looks in the mirror every morning when he shaves. That's the only person in Bugliosi's world.
It's not wrong.
That's
Sorry.
true. Ask his wife. She knows it.
What about the accuracy of the book, though, Charlie?
He had the dates right and the names right, but he had a million illusions that had nothing to do with my reality. He was only trying and convicting his own reality. Didn't have anything to do with me. I've already been through all these prisons.
But he did paint you as probably one of the most universally known persons
To who?
around, to readers, people who read it.
And they believed it?
I don't know. What do you think?
Then they're not as good as what they read, are they?
But the book, how accurate or inaccurate is it?
I never read it.
Didn't you brief it one time?
I read parts of it.
Yeah. How did you find it?
Like I say, it was reflections of what he was thinking. It had nothing to do with me. Seriously, the Charlie Manson that you created, that's not me. That's only an illusion in your minds. It hasn't got anything to do with me.
What's the real Charlie Manson?
I haven't really been able to make him up. See,
All right, so we'll stop it there. I'm going to stop sharing here and go back to you guys. So that was Manson, in his own words, denying the Helter Skelter story, denying the theory itself, and really taking a big shot at Vince Bugliosi, who a lot of people recently have come out hard, swinging hard against Bugliosi, which we'll get into in next week's Volume 2. So obviously Vince Bugliosi has not been popular after his death, according to recent things that have been written over the last several years. Some people believe he went way too far in using the Helter Skelter theory to guarantee a conviction against Manson himself, which would not have happened had they just told the alternate theory that we'll go into in Volume 2. But that will do it for Volume 1 of the finale of our Unholy Trinity of Cults series. I want to thank everybody for listening. Tune in next week for Volume 2. as we round out the alternate theories on Charles Manson and the Manson family murders.
Hi, I'm still here.
No,
Hi, Jeff.
hi.
I
You're
was
still
going to
here.
go right back to you, and here you are.
Intently. I just want to say, as a casual follower of Manson,
Mhm.
I watched a documentary that neither of you recommended. I forget what it was called. It was called like The Family Inside Charles Manson or something like that.
Inside
and
the mind of Manson.
No, it wasn't that.
Okay.
It wasn't Inside the Mind. But it was, a dramatized documentary, and it was centered around one of the women that went by the name.
It was Linda Kasabian telling the story, right? Was she kind of
Perhaps.
black? Was she shaded? You couldn't.
Yes.
That's Linda Kasabian. That's the girl that was the star witness who got immunity.
Yes. Okay. So she hid in the car when
Mhm.
during the Tate murder. She
was the lookout.
Yeah.
She was the lookout. Yeah. I found it fascinating and terrifying that as she's telling this story in the beginning of the documentary, like if you watch the documentary from beginning to end, you're like, okay, yeah, typical Manson groupie, whatever. And then at the end, she's talking about how terrified she is and how bad she wants out.
Mhm.
So you know how the story ends now. And then if you go back and rewatch that part where she's telling how she got involved in the beginning, she's still smiling and
Yes.
she still admired Charles Manson after everything, which is so terrifying to think that she was terrified at the end. She's like, I want out. All those other people, they didn't want out.
No, they didn't.
They were all in.
Only because I truly
That's
believe
scary.
the only reason was the timing. If Linda Kasabian had been with them 6 months later, Linda Kasabian would have been a killer. She wasn't there long enough. She wasn't indoctrinated enough. That was Charlie's big mistake, bringing her along. That was a big mistake.
Interestingly enough, Linda Kasabian has not been heard from much at all in about 11 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing I want to say is, if you want something that it's not about Charles Manson, but you can clearly tell it's inspired by the Manson story. Watch The Following, season 1.
Mm-hmm.
It's brilliant. It's
It
terrifying. It's some of the best network television you'll ever see. Season 2 and 3 are absolute hot garbage. Don't watch them.
They are. Don't watch them.
But season 1 is fucking terrifying, and it really portrays the story of a completely obsessive cult that is just mind-numbingly brainwashed to do whatever this person says.
A murderous cult too.
Yeah. So fascinating stuff. You guys did a good job.
Well, thank you, sir. We will be back then with Volume 2. Did you have anything else, Leah, before we sign off?
No, I don't think so. I think I'm good. Fuck you, Bugliosi. I don't like you.
Well, I'm not prepared to roast old Vince yet, but it does seem like he played fast and loose, maybe with a few things, knowing that the Helter Skelter was guaranteed to get what he wanted, which in the end is what Manson deserved, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
But we'll talk about all that as we round out the unholy trinity of cults with the Volume 2 finale next week, the alternate theories around Charles Manson. And thank you all for being with us, and we will see you at that time.